Welcome to the Probability Podcast. Discussions on emerging and converging technologies, problems that are being solved, and the probability of positive and negative outcomes that we might expect. Now, please welcome your hosts, Jason, the generator Spracklin, and Patrick, the discriminator Lozon.
Hi everyone. The topic for this week is renewable energy technology. We'll uncover the challenges of balancing energy production with demand, explore the promise of green hydrogen and bioenergy, and discuss how industries from agriculture to manufacturing are harnessing these sustainable resources. Join us as we illuminate the path towards a cleaner, more resilient energy future. So, the questions for discussion today are, what is renewable energy and how has it evolved from its inception? What are the latest developments in this tech from the major players in the industry? How is renewable energy driving innovation across many diverse industries? And finally, what concerns and risks are associated with this technology as it becomes mainstream? What do you think, Patrick? Are you ready to become a renewable energy source?
The human body generates more bioelectricity than a 120-volt battery and over 25,000 BTUs of body heat.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I could become a battery. Yeah, that or a methane producer, one or the other.
Well, that was in the Matrix, right? Where they said the human body generates more bioelectricity than a 120-volt battery. So, I don't know who hasn't seen the Matrix movies, but in the Matrix movies, basically the machines, I'm sure driven by AI, took over the planet, essentially tried to enslave the human race, and turned us into an energy source. So there's the famous scene where they show all the humans in the pods hooked up just to drain our energy. So
yes.
If you want to see where our future is going to go now that AI is taking over the world, we're just going to become like a Duracell battery.
Let's hope not. Well, I think the idea behind renewable energy for us is a little bit then for the machines and the Matrix.
No, don't.
Yeah. If you look at sci-fi for stuff, there's lots of depiction of renewable energy sources and different utilization of technology, anywhere from solar to mechanical like turbines and things like that. And of course, when you think about Matrix, that's another I would say not a common analogy for utilization.
Perhaps not.
Yeah. I don't think we would do that to our cows per se either. It's just not practical. So,
but I think when you see it in science fiction, right, you'll see these futuristic movies, Blade Runner and whatnot, right, where they're showing solar panels and wind turbines powering everything. And I'm guessing in the minds of authors, you're a science fiction author, so the idea is that in the future we've depleted all of our natural resources as far as oil and gas and whatnot, right? And now we're depending on those sort of renewable sources. In fact, I think that's kind of the dystopian picture you paint in your one of your novels there, right?
Yeah. The idea behind if we think about what sustainability is, right? What is that? That's living in balance with your environment, right? Mm-hmm. That's about being able to not build systems that over time will defeat itself, right? They will eventually, it'll be like that, that snake that keeps eating itself. It's bound to just fail over time, right? And that's really what we have today, right? These systems that are based on forever growth and, let's keep consuming. That's ridiculous. That's not a well-balanced system. So there's a natural order of things. We've ignored that for many, many years. It's coming to catch up on us, right?
Yeah, and if we don't figure that out, then we will reach that sort of dead end, right? So in the macro, we talk about, this depletion of resources like oil and gas, right? But if you think about it at a very micro level, if you have a gas-powered car, you go fill that tank with gas, and then once you've burned all that gas, your car is just going to stop running, right? And that's,
Yeah.
I guess, like an interesting analogy at the micro level for people to understand the concept of renewable energy, as opposed to, a car that's working off a renewable source of electricity where it plugs into a solar grid, say. Then you just keep renewing, you keep kind of coming back to that energy source, and it's sort of infinite, I guess, until the sun burns out. But
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the issue I see here is that, it's a 100-year-old technology and it's still running strong. What other, you know, technology can you say has sustained a lifetime that long? It's time for it to be replaced. The internal combustion engine approach, like, maybe hydrogen or something, but that whole idea, gasoline for fuel, has to change, right? The idea is not sustainable over time. We have to go and pursue other avenues. Throughout the last century, we have many discoveries. Many inventors have brought up different alternatives, and because of capitalism and whatnot, things have been bought out and suppressed and so on and so forth. So we don't see what we should see now in technology. We're not flying around and like the Jetsons. And damn it, I want to be.
Not yet.
Yeah. So enough's enough. But let's get away from this.
Well, no, it's true what you say, though, that basically, if you look at it right now, you talk about balance, like you have, and maybe it's not 50-50, but you have half the world that's, fighting for these renewable energy technologies, and you have the other half clinging to these more archaic technologies that, that are going to eventually run out. We'll see who history looks at more kindly, but there's also there was a documentary called "Who Killed the Electric Car." It's been a long time since I watched it, right? But essentially, it was like we should have had the electric car a lot sooner than we have it right now. I mean, in the last whatever you want to call it, the last 10 years, it's become a real big thing, in society and the industry. But when you look at it, that technology has been around for a long time. But it was like you described; it was sort of big money and political lobbyists and all these things that essentially killed the electric vehicle. And maybe if they hadn't, we'd be much further ahead in that technology now.
Yeah, that's true. And the other side of this too is that if you look at the Earth, right, and you look at that images available throughout the internet, but that small little, there's a trace of it. There's a very fine trace of a line that goes along, and that's the atmosphere. It's such a tiny little envelope, right? And it's not any different than goldfish in a fishbowl, right? I mean, what are you doing in that water?
Pretty much, yeah.
We have this tiny little envelope that surrounds us, and we have to be careful what we put in that envelope.
If I remember,
we have to look at results.
Yeah, it was when I saw David Suzuki speak years ago. So I was, I'm still very much an advocate of keep taking care of the environment and sustainability and those types of things. But I guess it was about almost 15 years ago. For a few years, I was really passionate about it, and I was doing a lot of reading about it, and I went to see, David Suzuki speak a number of times in person at a number of events around the communities here. And people have their various opinions on David Suzuki, but I mean, he was a scientist for many years, had, the nature of things on CBC for a lot of years, very knowledgeable guy. And, he, two things. Number one, he made that analogy that you did, but he described it for people to understand is that the atmosphere of our planet is like the skin on a basketball. Right. And that, like, we look at our Earth and we think of it as, we look up and the sky is massive. We think the atmosphere is massive. But the atmosphere is not massive. It's essentially the equivalent of the skin on a basketball. The inside of a basketball is all air. So he's saying most of the Earth is just sort of the land and the core, and the atmosphere is a very thin veil. But the other point that he had made that was, I think we've referenced before on this podcast, was that he said, we know because we have, there's two things that separate humans from primates on the planet. He says one of them is opposable thumbs, right, which has allowed us to do many things that the chimps could not. And the other thing is foresight, that we can, unlike the animals, we can see things coming through analysis and conjecture and whatever, right? And that his analogy was that we know this is coming. We know what's happening. We essentially know what impact we're having on the atmosphere and on the environment. And it's like we're all in a car, barreling towards a brick wall at 100 miles per hour. And instead of trying to figure out how to stop the car, we're arguing about who gets to sit in the driver's seat, essentially, right? So
Exactly. Well, I think, if you look across the table, so to speak, all the major thought leaders, right, actually have communicated this type of message, have stated this need for balance, right, and sustainability, and it just continues to grow unheard, ignored, right? Ron Guerin, he just came down. He was former NASA astronaut. He came up to this. What did he say? He had a sober realization when he was gazing down at Earth, and that is the big lie we're living, which is all these systems, all this, made up stuff that we've done. It's not important, the economies, the whole idea of, the what we consider, the gears of what mankind is. It is really nothing in comparison to our ability to live in harmony with our planet, right? And that's really what we're getting into when we talk about this whole idea of sustainability and so on. So I guess we should get into renewable energy a little bit.
Yeah, kind of the background and the technology, but that was a good overview because it was kind of painting a larger picture. And you talked about, interestingly enough, that idea of the astronaut making the commentary is, pretty compelling, because if anybody has a perspective on the Earth, it's the people that have been up at space looking down at it in the macro. Back to what I said a minute ago, the macro and the micro. We live in the micro, right? We live in this every day. We need to get in the car. We need to get to work. The astronaut looks at the planet in the macro and goes, well, yeah, all these little things are important to individuals, but in the macro, it's we need to be thinking differently about what we're doing, right?
Yeah. So number one, if you want to have a healthy country, right? We can say a healthy economy, but you want to have a healthy country. You want to live in prosperity. You need to have energy, right? Energy is the number one. The measurement on whether you're going to do well on the global arena, so to speak. Now, with that in consideration, right? There are many ways you can produce energy. Some of those ways are natural and sustainable, and others are not. For instance, burning natural gas, burning coal, those are not sustainable. Even though we have, 1,000 years maybe of coal and shale, it's just not sustainable, right? The ideas around, moving into this, we'll say a new paradigm or new reality requires us to make those big leaps. And that means that we have to really engage across the board, government, individual industries, and the average person, and alternative approaches to generating power. That means, of course, we've got the big ones, right? We got wind, we got solar, we've got hydroelectric or water systems, even have geothermal, right? What kind of a newcomer that we don't talk about much, but it's getting there, is called biomass, right? The idea of these technologies is to basically either utilize what environmental energy there is. So almost like a parasitic effect on our world, right? We're utilizing the immense powers of gravity, or thermal energy, of or ultraviolet energy from the sun. We're from the climate, from our tidal systems in the ocean. That's the environmental side. The other side of the sustainable energy is the 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 ability to produce energy but replace it, regrow it, right? So there's kind of two different methods here, and that's where the kind of the biomass is, where you're able to produce fuels and energy from either a byproduct of plants and animals, and so you get bio oil and biogas and biomass, right? So the idea, of course, in this energy production is that there's more often than not with these systems, there's a high variability of supply. There's peaks and values or valleys in production typically. Solar is a good example. You can only produce when you have daylight, right? The idea, of course, is what do you do when you're not producing? The need now goes to being able to build power storage and distribution systems that are able to manage that dynamic nature of a dynamic production. And always, of course, the demand is dynamic in many different situations. Demand can change, right? So that's always the balance or the challenge in power systems. Power grid is to maintain that production balance to demand, right? Supply and demand.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned thermal energy. I was reading something the other day about this idea of thermal energy networks and their ability to decarbonize neighborhoods. But what I found really interesting was the idea that it was, again, this renewable energy source that they can take heat out of the mantle of the earth and use it to heat water. They can take cold, water out of the lakes and use it to cool down things in the city, right? And there's this sort of idea that now we no longer have to burn fossil fuels to heat spaces and to heat water, and that on average these thermal energy networks operate 6 times more efficiently than electric baseboard heating, and 3 times more efficiently than air source heating pumps and those types of things, right? So we're looking at really sort of inventive ways to draw energy from the earth and use it for the things we need. And again, that's sort of contributing to that, environmental sustainability that you mentioned.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the idea is either utilize the energy to, drive a turbine, or you utilize that energy to either cool or heat something else, right? Transfer that energy, right? So there's the technologies to do that, of course, are getting better and better as well. We've devised better methods of conveying. If you look at just your average fridge, and how much more efficient it is now in comparison to, even 30 years ago. So the technologies, even though they're similar, there's refinements, ongoing refinements, and continuous improvement in the devices and the materials we use, and to make them more and more efficient. That being said, that's what our technology's been like. You think about, we've been capturing energy in the ways of solar and wind power, since ancient times. Ancient Egyptians and such used to build. Their buildings were they're in a hot zone and the climate. Maybe not 10,000 years ago, but recently. And that they learned to build structures where you could be very comfortable in those buildings, but they'd have wind systems, internal temperature conveyance systems that would pull air out of the lower levels of the home, and they'd have cooling towers that would draw all hot air out of their home. So in effect, they were air conditioning. Modern air conditioners do the same thing and expand a lot more, or use a lot more energy uh, than these existing, we'll call them passive systems they used in 200, 300, 400 years ago, 1,000 years ago. So we still got a lot to learn about the past, and how we did things. So sure, we used mills and water mills and stuff to grind up things. We used wind power to uh, run machines, and basically that's the basis of the industrial revolution, before the oil and gas came in and started taking over. So hydropower, wind power, and trapping the thermal properties of the sun were all there before. We've just gotten better at and built more devices around that to take advantage of that. Now, geothermal is something that you were talking about, which is the bad old days. They weren't hacking into the lower mantle of the earth to take advantage of heat. That being said, the idea of biomass, I'm sure, was utilized, right? Take existing fast growing flora and fauna and use that to create energy from either have it generate a biogas that you can burn, or make this we can basically, you can even burn that product and then regurgitate it into the soil, and it replenish the enriching the soil is what I'm saying. Now, that being said, nowadays things have changed, right? We're moving away from that. We're really getting into solar energy in the last 20 years, maybe 25 years. We're seeing that proliferate across the world, solar collectors, and we're seeing it at a very small scale too. A 25 by 40 collector, let's say, out on the individual farms on platforms that tilt and rotate to maximize capture rate of the sunlight. The idea of wind energy, we've all seen those massive, windmills. Some of them, of course, are on the land, but there's others that are in farms out on the, well, I'll say the areas of the ocean where it's not too deep. The idea of being able to generate power consistently, though, is a bit of a challenge.
Not to mention all the dead bird cemeteries underneath the windmills, right? We had a certain leader of the free world seems very concerned about all the dead birds on their windmills, but not as concerned about the bigger environmental picture, but apparently was really concerned about the dead bird cemeteries underneath the windmills.
Yeah, I think birds are incredibly smart, and they usually can, not catch themselves into getting hit on the head by one of those massive wind turbines.
You would think so. I've seen so many birds just avoid my car going down the highway. I mean, it's but then again, the odd bird runs into my window in my house, so maybe some of them are kind of dumb. So maybe the bird cemeteries are filled with dumb birds.
Dumb birds. Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. I can count how many times.
And from the perspective of the bird community, right? The bird community is fine. We don't need those dumb birds. They're messing up our gene pool. So the birds are happy with the windmills. It's killing all the dumb birds. It's helping things become more sustainable, improving their environment. It feels like a win-win to me.
I would think so. Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of people, interestingly enough, now I don't necessarily align with either side of this, but there's a lot of people who have concerns about windmills kind of a low level vibration. They get headaches. They can't sleep, stuff like that. When they're too close, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much is that scientifically proven? How much is it that kind of related to, or possibly other things contributing to this? I don't know, but the idea, of course, is that you have to, when you put these huge towers out there, the idea is you're going to set them away from any living areas within a reasonable distance, right? And when people start complaining that we're in too close, that reasonable distance was not reasonable, and that's what really needs to be adjusted,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that all being said, the idea of wind is an interesting one. So we're catching variable wind patterns along the pattern or the surface of the Earth, up to maybe 200 meters, something like that. The really big ones, maybe 300. But that's it, right? And those shift around. There are areas, of course, you get fairly constant winds, but how many times have you driven down the highway and seen one of those big monsters, and they're sitting still, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not generating, right? Now, as you go up, you go up to 32,000 feet. Let's say, the power generation potential up there is like 100 times higher, right? Um, so as you keep going, the higher altitudes, the more you're guaranteed to have, wind power, wind density that's going to be sufficient to, push these large windmills.
Well, I'm assuming that's why when you're in an aircraft, right, you get that turbulence. I mean, it feels
Yeah,
pretty violent sometimes, right? So
it
I would
does.
imagine
Yeah,
that's compared to the kind of wind you feel if you walk outside or you're driving in your car, which can be pretty strong. But if you've ever been in a situation with very high turbulence, yeah, I mean it can be pretty jarring. So I mean that just I guess supports this idea that the wind speeds and everything are much stronger like the higher you go, right?
yeah, yeah. So the idea is they're also perpetual, right? They're very, very consistent
Hmm.
on the upper strata, right? So lo and behold, somebody's come up with an idea of, let's send a kite up there with a wind turbine on it, right? And, run a long extension cord, right? And we got some juice coming, right? So there's the idea behind this is not that crazy, right? And there's been a number of different companies that are looking into building, you know, solid, reliable, technology devices that can be launched and will stay, up and in flight perpetually, right? And generate power. Now, these may be 100 kilowatts or something like that per unit or something like that. But, if you're 100 kilowatts and you can power, 5 or 6 homes, that's a lot, right? So, there's, if you live in an island, or a remote area where you don't have, availability of, transmission lines and so on and so forth, you don't have the infrastructure, you need power. These types of, capabilities and this technology can be used. If you're on, you see the other side of this is gravity, right? The nasty side is gravity, and what happens if or when there's a problem, and then these things come crashing down, right? So,
Hmm.
well, let's solve that by, we'll just throw some barges out in the ocean, tie them to it, let them fly, right? Uh,
Yeah.
okay,
Well, I think the other thing
and
is the scalability of it, right? Like, is it a
yeah,
scalable solution, and will it kind of meet our energy needs? And that oftentimes seems to be the argument against some of these renewable energy technologies or solutions, right? But I think
yeah,
that it's not about the fact that we can just move to wind energy or solar energy. I think these are complementary to other energy sources, so we're not solely relying on one source, right? Like that's the reason why people put solar panels on their houses, right? Because will it power all their energy needs? Maybe not, but some of the more basic needs, like running a coffee maker or whatnot, can certainly be, helps can certainly be sustained through solar panels. And then there's also a system where people can, if they're not using much energy at all, which if you're just a single person or a couple in a house, maybe you're not using a lot, all this extra energy you produce, you can sell back to the grid, as it were, right? And if everybody was doing that, then we would collectively probably pool a lot more energy. And I think that's sort of the idea as well, is that it's the culmination of all these technologies that can help us create a more sustainable future, perhaps, right?
Well, I'm glad you brought that point up because, you know, way back when, in the bad old days, the idea was to centralize and have these large systems and these large centers for power production and massive distribution and so on and so forth. Well, those ideas are come and gone, right? It's not really that fault tolerant, and it's not sustainable from a point of view of looking at all the different centers and all the different uh, demand and supply centers and what we need to supply. Can we match that supply? It becomes that much more complicated versus breaking these into smaller components, right? And being able to produce smaller energy volumes, but also be able to balance that out in a local grid area. So what you're saying really is it's a big shift to the whole industry, right? The idea of small energy production, and this is where in the mass deployment of these windmills and these solar centers have really pushed the power generation industry to change and this from their original model and start looking at localized production, right? And with that, that opens up that potential, where you're putting out 25 kilowatts, right? Um, small energy production. I mean, the average house is, let's say, 5 kilowatts. You know, um, somewhere around there. Depends if you're running your air conditioner or not. But there's constant use, and then there's peak usage and all that stuff, right? You got to worry about. But the idea is, you don't need to have this megawatt, 1,000 megawatt production hydroelectric dam, near you. We have to look at it from a point of view of what can we do for fault tolerance, right? And how can we have localized production to help support that so we don't have these massive grid failures, right? So this all to me is great stuff because now we're building systems that not only the individual can produce power, the individual can benefit. It's created a little microeconomy for production of power, right? So it's a lot of changes have occurred in that way, right? That are over time will continue to benefit us. So you technically could, let's say you have a big plot of land and some of it's farm, some of it's not. You could launch one of these high airborne wind capture devices, and generate 100K worth of juice, and you could sell it back, or you could put out your own array of solar collection devices, or even build your own windmills and resurrect them or put them on your land and benefit from all that energy. But the idea is it's putting the power back to the individuals, to the smaller areas from the municipalities, and allowing a little more stability in the source production of power. So that being said, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What about some other, technologies that are kind of importance when it comes to this renewable energy tech?
Well, there's one about what they call green hydrogen, which is a bit of an oxymoron, I think, where they talk about Yeah. Okay, we're going to take water and we're going to put it through electrolysis and, basically free the hydrogen. So hydrogen will burn a lot like, it's basically gas, right? It'll burn, replace, gasoline. Um, but if you think about it, what water are we going to be taking to create, this to perform hydrolysis on? It certainly should not be our drinking water, because there's a lot of places out in the world now that really need drinking water. And just because you're in a spot in the world where you have a lot of it doesn't mean you always will, right? The idea of fresh water versus salt water, we got lots of salt water. So if you have a system that desalinates and performs electrolysis, I'm fine with it. That to me is green hydrogen, right? If it's pulling fresh water out of our lakes and streams and rivers, no, forget it. That's not sustainable. We need it. It's more importantly than generating hydrogen for our automobiles. That's just not, the math doesn't work. I'm sorry.
You're
No.
just taking a resource and then you're using it up to create energy, right? In a way that it's maybe not as renewable as you would like, I suppose. That it's there's some potential there, but like you said, not if we're going after other vital sources. But if you're looking at something like wave or tide energy, especially from the ocean, I mean that's a consistent thing, and a very powerful thing. So I think there's probably a fair bit of potential there for sure.
Incredible amount. And you think about the currents, they're fairly, there's I don't know, a dozen different major currents along the ocean, of the different oceans in the world. I'm probably underscoring that or understating that, sorry. But the idea around, this, we'll call them tidal energy or tidal currents, you can put some fairly significant pieces of equipment there, and turbines, and you can produce, multiple megawatts of energy. Now, the idea, of course, is you're doing this with, a collection of devices, not just one, right? The if you have a failure, well, you have a form of redundancy, right? You can still produce. The other side of it is, when you look at these, underwater turbines, there still is the equivalent of the dumb birds. I'm sorry to say, right? In this case, these are dumb fish. Now, I don't know about you. I went fishing. I don't think there was a smart fish. Well, okay, dolphins are mammals.
Yeah.
No one you see is smarter than he.
See?
And we don't Flipper lives in a world full of wonder, lying there under the sea.
Bang!
Bang! There goes the wind turbine.
hit by the underwater turbine propeller.
Yeah, the underwater turbine.
Sorry, Flipper. Yeah.
See, it's right in the lyrics of the theme song. They call him Flipper, faster than lightning. No one can see is smarter than he, or no one you see is smarter than he.
So Flipper is actually going to replace humankind, is what they're saying.
I think so.
We're going to kill ourselves off. Lack of power. Anyway, to get back into this, we should. So let's talk about some of the different systems they've got. The standard vertical and horizontal turbine setups. You got Archimedes screws. We've got systems that capture tide coming in and then hold back the water, and gravity then goes to work, and we funnel that water through turbines again. We have barges out in the ocean, and they have deployed out a number of suspended turbines into currents, and they're generating power. You even have ones that they act like what we talked about in the air, they were kites in the air. Well, these are the same, they're tidal kites. And they would basically ascend up into the flow, the current flow, and start generating power from the ocean floor. Of course, all these systems now are utilizing, fairly complicated control systems. Guess where they use in these complicated control systems? AI, of course,
Oh, of course, back to our friend AI, yeah.
Yeah, maximize, efficiency and production, of course. Now, wave energy is a little different than, throwing a turbine into a stream. Those systems are built on that reciprocating action and basically trying to compress, using that action to compress like a cylinder and then drive, basically a rotate an engine, so to speak. And the rotation, of course, then runs basically your turbine that way. So wave systems are fairly new, but they've like from a point of view of large scale commercial, they're not that popular, and they've had fairly long lifetime of R&D to develop them. But I do think that they're going to start, from a point of view of mass production. If we can get to that point of the deployment, mass production, I think we're going to have a sustainable industry here. And there was a estimate that was put together by the EIA from the U.S. They said, if you capture all this tidal power along the coastline of the U.S., you would be able to bring in 66% of their energy needs. I mean, that's a guess, I guess, but the idea here is that there's a lot of power that can be generated by these technologies, right? And we're at the very beginning, right? Very grassroots of really deploying these systems. Huge amount of opportunity here. We can be, if we get out of our own way, right? We could be generating electricity and the gigawatts. What's over gigawatt? Terawatt? I don't know. Probably, yeah. So getting into terawatts of production of power easily, right? But through small redundant systems, many different sources, through a system that's interconnected with many different power relay situations. So you can, if you have part of a grid that fails, that other parts will fail, can fail over, and you can in turn have a high degree of reliability. And that's if you have that underlying network all configured properly, right? So, yeah, the fault tolerance, building up basically reliability for your power supply and building up capacity, and in the end, having the power everywhere and anywhere, right? If you think about areas where maybe we should be living and not using up perfectly good farmland, right? Maybe we should be living.
There's an idea
in the deserts, and artificially managing those areas, and having these more pristine areas of to allow them to utilize to basically grow our food. So I know it's novel, I know it's crazy, but geez, that sounds reasonable, doesn't it?
Yeah, I saw something the other day in the over in the more desert-like area of the world in the United Emirates or somewhere like that. Was they were playing around with what they call cloud seeding technology, right? About trying to get the clouds to produce more water, because obviously water is a huge problem in that area of the world. So I think we're definitely getting a lot smarter in terms of ways that we can kind of influence our environment, take advantage of things like thermal energy and there's the limits are almost endless, and we might not ever fully get away from things like fossil fuels to an extent, but if we don't invest in those technologies, we never will. And thankfully, there's a lot of there's a lot of companies investing in those technologies, and we're seeing a lot of benefits across a lot of different industries. So maybe we talked a lot about the different types of technologies. So how are the what industries are, I guess, any industry that uses energy, I suppose, could benefit, but where are we seeing the most benefits overall?
Well, just to kind of continue what you said there, right now, many, you know, areas of tech and of industry are still utilizing oil and gas, right? They're still utilizing petroleum and, other forms of oil as power, either heat, what have you. I mean, essentially that has to all be replaced, right? And
Mm-hmm.
all that movement of machinery and people and materials, I mean, that's being done through the work of internal combustion engines. That's not going to be done by motors, right? And those motors, of course, are going to be quite efficient, but they're going to use a lot of energy, right? So we have to look at energy production, not as where we are today in production, but where we need to be if we pull all our vehicles and all our machines and then power them all from an electronic point of view. What does that look like, right? And to tell you the truth, we can do that, right? But we're going to have this cross section of power production that goes right across all the different technologies in order to ensure that we have the reliability, ensure that we have that sustainability, right?
Yeah, that
So
long
I'm
term.
not a fan of just going in one direction. I think we need to go in many.
Well, for sure, yeah. But there's also, I mean, we talked a lot about, sustainability and the environment and, protecting the earth, all these things that are certainly benefits of using renewable energy. But you also have to look at sort of the cost as well. And so
Yeah,
a lot of these, energy sources are, if you look at the sun, it's the biggest energy source in our universe. It's essentially free to an extent. I mean, building the technology is not free, but then you have certain interests that don't want these technologies to proliferate because there's lots of companies and individuals making huge sums of money off selling these fossil fuels and other non-infinite resources. And so there's a political element that comes into it, because as we know, there's a lot of lobbyists happening in government and whatnot. So but when you look at the actual benefits, one of them is around the economic competitiveness of these technologies and essentially benefit to the end consumer, right? If you can essentially power a fair bit of your home and your vehicle and whatnot through solar or through some other very economical means, then you're going to create an opportunity for more prosperity, right? You'll be spending less energy as a household. um, you'll be spending less money, and you'll be able to put money into other things. And while that sounds really great in theory, there's a lot of factions working against that as well, in a way, right?
yeah. Well, the idea of having individual production centers and individual ownership is what I'm going for, right?
Hmm.
That's an economic benefit, I think, of approaching these types of systems in a multifaceted, multi-production node level, right? There's a significant gain economically for the
Hmm.
individual, not the big, corporation, right? You're putting the power to the people. I love that. Power to people. Yeah, literally, right? Yeah, I just Googled what, asked the perplexity here. Okay, how big, if we had a solar collector, right? How big would it have
Hmm.
to be to power um, North America, right? The whole of
There's a
North
question.
America, Canada, U.S., right, and Mexico, right? Well, that would have to be 25 to 30,000 square miles
Oh, there you go.
using the current technology. So
It's just tiny.
Yeah,
You know?
but we got 30,000 square miles of desert. We just cover it up, right? You cover it up with solar collectors. Problem solved. I don't think though. Let's go back to the exotic chemicals we need and materials we need to build these, solar collectors, right? I don't think we have enough of that, and that's the challenge, right? Anytime we look
Mm-hmm.
at these systems, right, you have to look at the overall cost of production of these systems and these devices and so on and so forth, right? All these windmills, there's a huge amount of energy goes into creating them, right? How long
Yeah,
will they
absolutely.
last, right? How long will they be able to stay in service, and how much energy will they produce in their lifetime, right? And what about once they're beyond their lifetime? Can they be retrofitted? Can they be refitted? And can they then go back
Hmm.
into service again, right? These are questions that we need to think about when we think about sustainability. It's not short term, right? You got all these people running around the world thinking, well, if it's not passed next week, I don't need to worry about it. But really, you know, we should be relying on our governments to be not thinking every time that they come in and out of power every 4 years or 3 years or whatever the cycle is. We got to be thinking long term, right? Next 25 years, next 50
Oh, for
years,
sure. Yeah.
right? We have to have we have lots of bright minds out there, and we can I'm sure we can sit in a room and figure things out a little bit here. And that being said, right, plan for things, right? And also look at the gaps and the concerns we have for knowledge that we haven't really accrued yet, and develop those areas, right? So with bioenergy, for instance, um, it's there's a lot of very interesting technologies involved there. Um, there's utilization of like biomass, which is like corn or sugar cane or soybeans or hemp or grasses, and there's also wood, right? So one of the utilizations of biomass, the industries are looking at it. Well, they're going after our softwood, our standard softwood, and stripping that down and using that for biomass. No, right? That doesn't make any sense. What we should be doing, is looking at specific types of wood that we would utilize for biomass, wood that is able, and we are looking at some genetically modified wood species, tree species, to that they can advance, their growth, right, and be fairly big players, and not also, cause major deforestation, right? And there's alternatives to that too. There's other ones like bamboo, hemp, you know, cannabis, hemp. Um, there's giant reed. There's Napier grass. There's giant hogweed. There's all these weeds. They grow like massive. And we got to go cut them down all the time. And geez, maybe we could use them. They grow so fast. They can create all this biomass, and they can create it quickly. And they're a bloody weed. They're an
That's
invasive
the idea
species. Whatever.
of
Yeah.
biofuels, right? Wasn't
Yeah.
that was the whole thing in the second or third Back to the Future movie, where
Mr.
uh,
Fusion.
Doc Brown went to the future because remember in the first movie he went to the past. He needed a lightning bolt to charge up this car because this car needed the
Yeah.
what was it, plutonium, right? Because that was the initial scene where they stole the plutonium and to power the car and so on. And then he goes to the future and he comes back and Marty's like, where are you going to get the where are you going to get the plutonium? He's like, no, it's no worries. He just starts pouring like banana peels and things into the
Little
flux
Mr. Fusion.
capacitor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
it powers the car, right? So
That was
so
classic.
in the
Yeah.
future they figured out how to power up using the biofuels there
I
for
mean, that was so
sure,
good. That was so good.
right?
Yeah. He emptied the. I found an old beer can. He emptied the contents of the beer can and he threw the can in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, when you
That's
think
right.
about it, we'd all love to have that little Mr. Fusion, on our cupboard, right? And just power our lawnmowers and power our house and have that independence, you know. And this is where things can go.
How are we going to get there?
You gotta come back with me. Where? Back to the future.
Back to the future.
Listen, what are you doing, Doc? I need fuel.
Mr. Fusion.
Get in the car. No, Doc, I just got here. Okay, Jennifer's here. We're gonna take the new truck for a spin. Well, bring her along. This concerns her too. Wait a minute.
88 miles an hour, man.
There you go. We
Yeah.
need Mr. Fusion to save us all.
Yeah, I think the only last thing we could talk about too is hydroelectric, because hydroelectric's been around forever, right? And there's a lot of dam projects. Some of them have, and dams have failed, and there's some bad news around that. Right? But hydroelectric's been around. It's fairly consistent, fairly stable, and from a point of view of high production, if you built in the proper area, you can have a very reliable and consistent source of energy. So I looked up top 5 large projects, hydroelectric dams. So Nigeria, they're looking at the Mambilla hydropower dam. It's 3,050 milliwatt or megawatts. The Tajikistan, yes. The Rogan Dam there, 3,600 million watts. Pakistan, we have 2, both over 4,000 million watts. The China, they have, the next one would be Ethiopia. There's the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. You got to give them points for the name, right? It's going to end up with generating 6,500 million watts. But the grandmother of them all is going to be the Tibetan Plateau Grand Bend in China, where they're harnessing the Yarlung Sanpo River. And they're looking at 60 gigawatts projected. It's an incredible amount of energy. That being said, lots of areas still that can be developed. I know that building dams in your flooding areas, there's lots of cost for those projects, but I'm just pointing out that there are some areas that can still be developed in the Amazon River Basin. Supposedly there's some areas still left in China, which I talked about, Africa, Southeast Asia, Canada. We're looking still with some projects to add 14,500 million watts to our 71,000 capacity. So, world production is somewhere around 1,400 gigawatts. So that's a lot of power we're generating hydroelectric.
Well,
right?
we're going to need it, because when we're talking about this, the other thing we're not always thinking about is the energy needs into the future, right? That the population's growing exponentially, and not just that, but our technology, right? We've covered this in our first season a lot about AI and the power consumption needed to drive these systems, and you're seeing this now. It's massive, really, as far as maybe it'll get better eventually, but there's a huge drain on the electrical grid just trying to drive these AI systems. And I was watching the other day that it's also going to be a huge drain on the network with a lot of these AI agents and things moving around, but not just AI, but many technologies, right? That are, we're going to need lots and lots of gigawatts for sure, right?
Yeah.
This sucker's electrical, and I need a nuclear reaction to generate the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity.
21 gigawatts!
Thank you for listening to the Probability Podcast. Please join us next time for more